It was supposed to be a quiet weekend. My roommate Sarah had gone to visit her family, leaving me alone in the apartment for the first time since we moved in. Our building was old but secure, heavy doors, double locks, and a buzzer system for entry. It was one of the reasons we'd picked the place. That Friday night, I settled in with a glass of wine and a horror movie, enjoying the rare solitude. Around 9 p.m., I thought I heard a faint creak from the hallway, but I chalked it up to the old pipes or a neighbor upstairs. By 11, I was getting ready for bed when I noticed something strange. The front door was unlocked. I froze. I knew I had locked it after coming home from work. I always double-checked, a habit drilled into me by my overly cautious parents. My heart raced as I locked it again, sliding the deadbolt into place. I brushed it off as me being forgetful maybe. I'd been distracted with groceries or my phone. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard it again, a creak, but louder this time. It wasn't coming from the hallway outside the apartment. It was inside. I sat up, holding my breath, straining to hear over the pounding of my heart. Another sound followed this time. It was faint but unmistakable. A footstep. I grabbed my phone and quietly dialed 911, whispering to the operator that I thought someone was in my apartment. They assured me officers were on their way and told me to stay on the line. As I whispered to the dispatcher, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A soft, deliberate tap-tap on the other side of my bedroom door. I clamped my hand over my mouth to stifle a scream. The dispatcher was telling me to stay calm, but I couldn't respond. My eyes were glued to the door, the shadow of feet visible in the sliver of light underneath. The tapping stopped, and then the doorknob turned slowly. I grabbed the only weapon I could find, an old lampstand, backed into the corner of the room. The door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. He was tall, dressed in dark clothes, with a ski mask covering his face. He didn't say a word, just stood there, staring at me. I screamed, swinging the lamp as hard as I could. It shattered against his shoulder, and he staggered but didn't fall. Suddenly, there were shouts from outside the apartment, police officers, yelling for someone to drop to the ground. The man bolted, crashing through the window and into the fire escape. The police found me shaking in the corner, barely able to speak. They searched the apartment and discovered something that still haunts me. In the closet of our spare bedroom, they found a sleeping bag, food wrappers, and tools. He had been living there for days, maybe longer, watching us, waiting. Sarah and I moved out the following week. I'll never feel safe in my own home again, and every creak or shadow feels like a warning. Sometimes, the scariest monsters aren't the ones you see in horror movies. They're the ones who blend into the real world, waiting for their moment. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and I was home alone, enjoying the rare chance to relax. My boyfriend was working the night shift, and our small suburban house felt too big without him. I'd just finished cleaning up after dinner when the lights flickered. I didn't think much of it until they went out entirely. The house was swallowed in darkness. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to make my way to the kitchen window. The streetlights were still on, which was strange. Usually, if it was a power outage, the whole block would be affected. As I turned to grab a candle from the drawer, I heard a soft clink. It came from the sliding glass door in the living room. My heart skipped a beat. I turned off my phone's flashlight and tiptoed toward the sound, trying to keep quiet. From the corner of the hallway, I could see the living room and the outline of the sliding door. It was open. I was sure I'd locked it earlier. Every instinct screamed at me to call for help, but I couldn't risk making a sound. I backed away, heading toward the front door, when I heard a faint rustling coming from the hallway closet. Someone was in the house. I held my breath and crouched down, my shaking hands fumbling to unlock my phone. My plan was simple: call 911, get out of the house, and run to the neighbors. As I reached the front door, I saw something small glinting in the porch light: a padlock. The outside of my front door had been locked with a padlock. Whoever was inside the house had planned this. I barely had time to process it when a creak sounded from the hallway behind me. I turned to see a shadowy figure emerge, dressed head to toe in black, their face obscured by a mask. I screamed and bolted for the kitchen. My phone slipped from my hand in the chaos, sliding under the table. The only thought in my mind was to get out. I grabbed a knife from the counter and hurled it toward the figure, missing but buying myself a second to dart toward the back door. As I slid it open, I saw something in the yard: another figure, standing completely still, watching. My options were gone. I ran upstairs, locking myself in the bathroom. My breath came in shallow gasps as I heard them moving through the house. Their footsteps deliberate, slow, like they were enjoying the chase. I climbed into the small attic crawl space, closing the panel behind me. It was cramped and stifling, but it was my only chance. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were directly below me. I couldn't see them, but I could hear their low, whispered voices. They were talking about me, about where I could be hiding. One of them laughed, a chilling, quiet laugh that felt like it echoed in my skull. Then, silence. I stayed in that crawl space for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. Finally, I heard distant sirens. My boyfriend must have noticed I wasn't answering and called the police. When the officers arrived, the house was empty, the intruders gone. They found rope, duct tape, and a crowbar hidden in the bushes outside, along with muddy footprints leading to the open sliding door. To this day, I don't know what they wanted or why they chose my house. But I moved out the next week, and I never stay anywhere without double-checking every lock-on, every possible hiding place. It was late around 11 p.m. when I heard the knock. It was soft, almost hesitant, but unmistakable. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone, and my neighborhood wasn't the type where people dropped by unannounced. My house sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by dense trees, the kind of place that felt isolated even though it was technically suburban. I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached the door quietly, peeking through the peephole. A man stood on the porch, his head down, his hands shoved into the pockets of a dark hoodie. He didn't look up, but something about the way he stood too still, too patient, set my nerves on edge. "Who is it?" I called through the door, trying to sound more confident than I felt. No answer. "I'm not opening the door unless you tell me who you are." The man shifted slightly, then knocked again. This time, louder. My heart was pounding now. I backed away from the door and grabbed my phone, dialing 911. Before I could press call, I heard a low voice, muffled but distinct. "Please, help me." I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. Was he hurt? Lost? He didn't look like someone who needed help. He looked wrong, like he didn't belong there. "Stay right there," I said, trying to keep the fear out of my voice. "I'm calling the police." I expected him to argue or plead, but instead, he just stood there, silent. The operator answered, and I quickly explained the situation, describing the man and his strange behavior. They told me to stay on the line and keep the door locked. When I looked back through the peephole, he was gone. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A new sound caught my attention, the faint creak of footsteps coming from the side of the house. I ran to the living room and peeked out the window. He was there, standing in the shadows, staring directly at me. Panic set in. I locked myself in the bedroom and told the operator what was happening. They assured me officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity. Then I heard the back door rattle. I had locked it earlier, I was sure of it, but the sound of the handle jiggling told me he was trying to get in. "Go away," I screamed, my voice shaking. "The police are coming." The rattling stopped. For a moment, there was silence. Then came the sound of glass shattering. I couldn't breathe. He was inside. Footsteps echoed through the house, slow and deliberate. He wasn't rushing. He knew I had nowhere to go. I wedged myself into the corner of the closet, trying to stifle my sobs. The footsteps grew louder, closer. "Please," he said again, his voice low and almost mocking. "Help me." The bedroom door creaked open. I bit my lips so hard it bled, desperate not to make a sound. And then, just as I thought he'd find me, there was a blinding flash of red and blue lights outside. The footsteps retreated, fast this time, and I heard the front door slam. Moments later, the police were inside, their voices calling out to me. When I finally emerged, shaking and pale, the officers told me they hadn't found anyone, but they did find a crowbar near the broken glass and a smear of blood on the windowsill. I didn't sleep that night or the next. Whoever he was, whatever he wanted, he knew where I lived, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he might come back. It started with a mistake, or at least that's what I thought. I was home alone on a rainy Thursday night, half asleep on the couch, when the doorbell rang. It startled me because no one ever showed up unannounced. I threw on a hoodie and peeked through the peephole. A woman stood there, soaked from the rain. She looked to be in her late 20s, wearing a pale yellow raincoat. She was shivering, her eyes darting around nervously. I cracked the door, keeping the chain latch on. "Can I help you?" She glanced at me, and then, over her shoulder, her voice shaky. I think I have the wrong address. I'm supposed to meet someone here, but..." She trailed off, looking over her shoulder again. I hesitated. Something about her felt off, but she was clearly upset and drenched. "Do you need to come in for a moment, to dry off?" I offered reluctantly. Her eyes lit up with relief. "Oh, thank you. Just for a second." I closed the door, unlatched the chain, and let her in. She stepped inside, dripping water onto the hardwood floor. I grabbed a towel and handed it to her, trying to keep my unease in check. "Who are you looking for?" I asked. "My friend," she said, wringing the towel nervously. "But I must have gotten the address wrong." I nodded, watching as she kept glancing at the windows. "Do you want to call someone? I have a phone charger if you need it." She shook her head quickly. "No, that's okay." An awkward silence followed. The storm outside seemed to grow louder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. "Then," she said, almost too casually, "do you live here alone?" I froze. "What?" Her tone changed. She seemed calmer now, less jittery. She took a step closer to me. "I mean, it's a nice house. Do you live here by yourself?" Every instinct screamed at me to lie. "No, my boyfriend's upstairs," I said firmly, though my voice wavered. Her eyes flicked to the staircase, and she gave me a faint smile. "Oh, that's good." I tried to keep my composure. "You know, I really think you should head out. It's late, and..." Before I could finish, the lights flickered and went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I heard her let out a sharp breath. "Stay here," I said quickly, grabbing my phone for the flashlight. When I turned the beam of light back toward her, she was no longer in the living room. "Hello," I called out, my voice shaking. I scanned the room, then the hallway. She was gone. I locked the front door and bolted it, my pulse racing. Then I heard it. A low creak from the back of the house. I moved slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. The sliding glass door in the kitchen was open. Rain poured in from outside, soaking the floor. I hurried to close it when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Footprints. Muddy, bare footprints leading into the house. They weren't hers. A shadow moved in the corner of the room. I turned, the flashlight landing on a man standing near the pantry. He was tall, his face hidden under a soaked hood, his eyes locked on me. I stumbled backward, dropping the phone. "Get out," I screamed, my voice breaking. He didn't move. Suddenly, there was a loud pounding at the front door. The woman's voice called out, frantic and desperate. "Let me in. He's coming." I looked between the man in the kitchen and the front door, unsure what to do. The pounding grew louder. "Please, he's after me." The man in the kitchen took a step forward, his hand reaching into his jacket. I ran, not to the door, not to the man, but upstairs. I slammed the bedroom door shut and locked it, grabbing my phone from the floor where I'd dropped it earlier. I called 911, whispering to the operator about the intruders. The pounding at the front door stopped, replaced by a deadly silence. Then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming up the stairs. When the police arrived, they found the front door wide open. The kitchen was empty, but they discovered muddy footprints leading out into the woods. The woman and the man, they were gone. The officers told me to stay somewhere else for a few nights. As I packed my things, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman wasn't just some lost stranger. She hadn't come to my house by mistake. She'd brought him with her. It was supposed to be a simple weekend. My husband, Daniel, and I had agreed to host his old college friend, Nate, for a couple of days while he was in town for a job interview. Nate had always been charming, the type who could get along with anyone. Daniel swore he was harmless, and though I didn't know him well, I had no reason to say no. At first, everything seemed normal. Nate arrived Friday evening with a bottle of wine as a gift. He was all smiles and friendly banter, asking me about my work, complimenting our house, and sharing funny stories from his college days with Daniel. But little things started to bother me as the night went on. He asked a lot of questions, too many. Not just polite small talk, but specific ones about our routines, how often we locked the doors, if we had a security system, and even how often our neighbors checked in. It was subtle, but enough to make me uncomfortable. When I brought it up to Daniel after Nate had gone to bed, he waved it off. "You're overthinking. He's just curious," he said. Saturday was worse. While Daniel went out for errands, Nate stayed behind, claiming he had to prepare for his interview. I was working in the kitchen when I noticed him wandering around the house. "Looking for something?" I asked. "Just admiring the place," he replied with a grin. "You've got a beautiful home." His tone was friendly, but the way his eyes lingered on the family photos and the layout of the rooms made my skin crawl. Later that night, I caught him standing by the front door, fiddling with the lock. He jumped when he saw me. "Sorry it was sticking earlier, so I thought I'd check it out," he explained. That night, I barely slept. Something felt off about him, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise. It sounded like faint voices outside. I got out of bed and peeked through the curtains. 2 men were standing at the edge of our driveway, talking quietly. One of them kept glancing toward the house. My heart sank. I nudged Daniel awake and whispered what I'd seen. He groggily got up and went to check the front door. To our horror, it was unlocked. "I locked this before bed," Daniel said, his voice low. We quickly locked it again and turned off all the lights, trying to make it seem like no one was awake. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The next morning, I confronted Nate. "Were you expecting anyone last night?" I asked. trying to sound casual. He gave me a confused look. No, why? I didn't press further, but my suspicion only grew when I noticed his duffel bag. It looked heavier than when he arrived. By the time he left that afternoon, I felt relieved but uneasy. That night, we finally decided to check the footage from our doorbell camera. What we saw made my blood run cold. Around midnight, Nate had stepped outside and met with the two men from the driveway. They exchanged a few words, and then Nate handed them a small notebook. He glanced back at the house before walking back inside like nothing had happened. Terrified, we called the police and handed over the footage. It turns out Nate had been scoping out our house all weekend, taking notes about our schedule, security, and even our valuables. The men he met were part of a burglary ring, and Nate had planned to set us up for a break-in the moment he left. Thankfully, the police caught the men before they could act. But I'll never forget the feeling of betrayal and dread, knowing that someone we trusted had been plotting against us the entire time. From now on, I don't care who it is no more, house guests. It was late afternoon when the doorbell rang, startling me. I wasn't expecting any packages, but I figured Daniel, my husband, might have ordered something without telling me. I peered through the window and saw a man standing on the porch, dressed in what looked like a delivery driver's uniform, navy blue shirt and black cap. He was holding a medium-sized box, scanning the street like he was checking the address. I opened the door just a crack, keeping the chain latch in place. "Delivery for Sarah," he said, glancing at a clipboard. "That's not my name," I replied, narrowing my eyes. "You've got the wrong house." "Oh, must have been a mix-up," he said, scratching the back of his head awkwardly. "Could you check the address on the box? It might be for a neighbor." Something about him felt off. Maybe it was the way he avoided looking directly at me, or how his uniform didn't have any kind of logo. "No, sorry," I said quickly, shutting the door. Before I could lock it, I heard his tone change, low and menacing. "Open the door, ma'am. I'm not asking again." Panic set in as he slammed his shoulder into the door, the chain latch straining under the pressure. I scrambled to grab my phone, but my hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The chain snapped, and the door flew open. He stepped inside, followed by another man dressed in all black, who had been hiding around the corner. "Stay quiet, and you won't get hurt," the first man growled, pulling a knife from his pocket. I backed away, my mind racing. "Take whatever you want," I stammered. "Just don't hurt me." They didn't respond. The second man immediately started rifling through the living room, pulling open drawers and dumping out their contents. The first man kept his eyes on me, inching closer. I was desperate. Then I remembered something. Daniel had installed a panic button under the kitchen counter. It triggered a silent alarm that would call the police. I have cash in the kitchen," I blurted, pointing toward the back of the house. The man smirked. "Lead the way." I walked slowly, forcing myself to stay calm. When I reached the counter, I pretended to open a drawer, but instead pressed the button. "What's taking so long?" The second man barked from the living room. "She's stalling," the first one snapped, grabbing my arm. At that moment, I spotted the frying pan on the stove. With everything I had, I swung it, hitting him square in the face. He stumbled back, clutching his nose, blood pouring between his fingers. The other man charged toward me, but before he could reach me, the sound of sirens filled the air. They froze, exchanging panicked glances. "Let's go," the first man yelled, bolting toward the front door. I didn't get far. The police surrounded the house within seconds, guns drawn. Both men were arrested on the spot. Later, the officers told me the delivery driver scam was a common tactic for home invasions. They'd pretend to have a package to get someone to open the door, then force their way in. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about how close I'd come to something far worse. We've since upgraded our locks, installed cameras, and I no longer open the door for anyone I don't know, even if they're holding a package.